Yo, people, we are back for another episode of Commissioner's Corner. Of course, I'm your host of the most, NK, aka the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour. And of course, I'm always joined by my co-host, the pro wrestling historian, UK's number one black pro wrestling historian, the pro wrestling encyclopedia himself, Knowledge. How you doing, sir?
Yeah, I'm good, NK. I'm good. Just I'm just enjoying my evening. I've done a lot of gardening over the last couple of days, so just enjoying the weather. But we've got a lot of rain for the rest of the week.
Yeah, because the weather was good for like the last 3 days. Like it was pretty good, and then just the forecast don't look great. But this is England for you guys. This is England. This is England.
How you been? What's happening?
I've been all right, man. I've been all right. You know, just working, just waiting for summer. This is literally waiting for summer so I can, enjoy myself, holidays, whatnot. Just get out of the routine. Anything to break up the routine in it. But
So I saw your clip that you released from the upcoming Rear
episode. It was about a shameless plug. Was about the Kendrick Lamar and Drake beef. We have like a whole 1 hour and 30-minute conversation about that. That was really fun. Pretty in-depth analysis on the beef. Yeah, man. This is my first. Obviously we Knowledge talk hip hop all the time, but this is my first rap beef, man. Okay, no, not my first rap beef, but my first rap beef on a major scale, major scale, like global scale. Like obviously, like we get into like the Pusha T stuff like in the past, but this is like the first one where it's like, oh shit, like it felt like hip hop stopped for a sec, to consume this. So, yeah,
this was big. I'm not gonna lie to you and pretend that like I was invested in it as much as you lot. It's like because obviously, these aren't my rappers.
Yeah.
But I like what I heard. A lot of the stuff I liked what I heard anyway. But I'll definitely check out the Rear podcast. I want to hear
man.
A breakdown. Yeah. But yeah, it's it was really fun listening to. Well, not even listening. It was really fun watching people just go crazy over hip hop for a couple week period. It was really cool.
It was when I knew it was mad. It was like my timeline's usually like wrestling, football, so on and so forth, and it was like Backlash was on the same day, and it was like I barely saw any tweets about Backlash, and I just saw Kendrick Lamar. I was like, okay, this shit, this is something. This is definitely
that was you guys, Nas and Jay.
Yeah, pretty much.
We didn't have social media back then, though. But if we did, it would have been huge.
Yeah, this was our Nas and Jay for sure.
I remember when because we didn't even they dropped those songs, and we were over here in the UK. We didn't have the internet back then to we couldn't even just go online and listen. We had to wait for Tim Westwood or whoever to drop the song. So we were just on Friday at 9 when Tim Westwood come on, the bombs went off and he played the song or whatever. This was a few days or however long after New York heard it, but it was a big deal back then. But now with social media, the Drake and Kendrick Lamar thing, it was just really, really big. It was really fun watching people react to it and how happy it made people or upset it made people, actually. I don't know. I saw some people having breakdowns online. And I don't even mean more. I'm talking just regular Joes just in a storm, mentally breaking down. It was pathetic, really. But what was up with Maul, by the way? What I've never seen a man get angry over a song that he wasn't being spoken about.
Listen, Stan culture has gone absolutely mad. I mean, we should know. Wrestling fans, like we see the Crusades people go on to protect, their favorite companies. Imagine hip hop, that niggas with hip hop, like it's the same shit.
Yeah, we didn't have that. Well, you know what, okay, we might have had it, but we didn't have social media to even. We wouldn't know. We'd have to speak to the people in person to hear them go crazy. Because imagine just speaking to someone and they did that to you and during a conversation. Talk about often, but we didn't have that back then. We just had to meet people and realize how crazy they were during conversation. But
before we get into the main topics, make sure you like, share, comment, and subscribe. To all the people watching live, big yourself up, interact with us in the comments. And to all the people watching on playback, make sure you react in the comment section down below. It's been a particularly slow news week in regards to wrestling, but
I'm putting that on.
it's been a particularly slow news week in regards to wrestling. So interaction in the comment section would definitely help. But before we get into the main topics, we're gonna, give you a little history lesson. I know you guys in the comment section like the history lessons. There was a recent episode of Dark Side of the Ring that focused on Jim Barnett. Now, we haven't watched the episode in full yet, but we'd like to give you a kind of a breakdown of who Jim Barnett is in regards to wrestling and his significance, because he's someone who's, had a hand in several wrestling promotions and several important wrestling promotions. So, Knowledge, I'm going to throw the question to you. Briefly speaking, who is Jim Barnett?
Jim Barnett, yeah, I haven't seen the episode. I've been wanting to watch it, but I just haven't had a chance. Been too busy watching these 1970s blaxploitation movies.
Oh my god, I've been seeing you tweet about that. Why?
I told you a while ago. I just enjoy. I just sit down sometimes. It's my nostalgia is sitting down here for watching these movies, because this is the stuff that my dad used to watch when I was a kid. And the one that I tweeted that clip of, I hadn't seen that one for at least 25 years. And I just saw it on YouTube. I was like, let me watch this. And my God, you see that with, I knew it was bad then, but you sit down and it's like, holy shit. Like,
there was a video essay I watched where somebody said blaxploitation, the Tubi movies are the new blaxploitation films. Yeah.
Those Tubi movies. The one I watched, the one I clipped was Disco Godfather with Rudy Ray Moore. Eddie Murphy's got a movie about Rudy Ray Moore called My Name is Dolomite. It's a really good movie, actually. He was nominated for an Academy Award for that movie, but it's an awful movie. I'm watching Dolomite Part 2, which I haven't seen for years. I've got it on. It's not as bad as Disco Godfather, but it's pretty horrible. But anyway, sorry, Barnett. Yeah, I haven't seen the episode, but I know the subject pretty well. I mean, I don't want to go over the Black Saturday thing because for what I heard, it was a really good episode. And if anyone wants to watch it and go into great detail, they can watch Dave and Jim Cornette break it down. I think I heard Oli was on the show because they had old clips of him because he passed away early this year. But those are the two best people to get the information from, Dave Meltzer and Jim Cornette. But Barnett was who was Jim Barnett? Jim Barnett was the closest person in wrestling to Ted Turner. I've spoken about Jim Barnett in brief since I've been on these wrestling's platforms for the last 3 years. I've spoken about Barnett. I think the first podcast episode I ever did on wrestling, I mentioned Barnett a little bit. But he was the closest person in wrestling to Ted Turner. So Eric Bischoff and other people may have ran WCW at various points. When WCW was in business, Eric Bischoff ran it for a bit, and Bill Watts ran it for a bit, and Jim Herd and Kip Frey, all these people. The person that Ted Turner dealt with in terms of the wrestling side of the whole wrestling business was Jim Barnett. Like, these people couldn't really get a meeting with Ted Turner. Like, they had to call Barnett for Barnett to reach out to Ted Turner to get a meeting with him. That's how close Barnett was to Ted Turner. So Barnett was he was a very famous wrestling promoter. He was a decent booker, but he was more known for promotion. And he was really into fine art. He was a bit of a socialite, Barnett. He was into fine art. And I think he just got into the wrestling business because he was good at it, and he was a good promoter, and it was also quite popular at the time, and it really enhanced him being on the social ladder, him being parts of certain wrestling promotions at the time really made him somewhat hot property in the local territory. So, but he was really popular in a lot of different political circles. He went to the White House many times, Jim Barnett. And you think about someone in pro wrestling, especially back then, going to the White House is pretty crazy when you think about it. But he was always brought in by promotions to help them when they were on their arse. But he was never really a member of the NWA because he was gay. And back then they didn't want people like Barnett directly involved in, to have too high of a position in pro wrestling. I'll tell you something about Barnett. Have you ever heard of Rock Hudson?
No.
Right, so he was a really famous actor in the 1960s.
Okay.
Went into the 70s. He was a really famous actor. He may have been the most famous actor in the world at various points, but he was the Hollywood hunk, and he was gay. And him and Barnett used to date. They were together for a while, and so that a lot of the wrestlers knew that Rock Hudson was gay way before the world did. There was always rumors about Rock Hudson being gay, but it was never. He was always married to women, or he was always dating women publicly, but really privately he was gay. But him and Barnett were together for a while. But yeah, his most popular run was in WCW in Australia, not the American version of WCW. He ran WCW in Australia in the 70s, late 60s to the early 70s. Their top star at the time was Mario Milano. And he only came back, sorry, he only came back to America full time when Ray Gunkel, who ran part of the Georgia territory, Ray Gunkel, he died, and his wife actually took over his part of the business. However, they didn't. The other people involved in the Georgia territory, they didn't want to work with her because she was a woman. So they actually kicked her out of her own promotion, and she then started an opposition promotion called All's. I think it's All was it not All's? What was it called? All Star Pro Wrestling out of Georgia, or maybe it was All North Star Pro Wrestling. There's a lot of promotion names over the years, but she started her own promotion, and they wanted to run that promotion out of business. So those people, it was Paul Jones was the guy that was in charge of this one. He called Barnett because Barnett had a reputation for being ruthless and brutal and callous. But on the outside, Barnett was a gentleman, softly spoken. He was a very small man. And if you ever hear his voice, I think Jim Barnett for years and years and years was maybe the most impersonated wrestling personality. As him, Hogan, and Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair and Randy Savage and Jim Barnett. If you're Barnett's, people used to do impressions of Barnett all the time. He always used to say "my boy," and there was this thing. He'd always refer to people as "my boy." My boy. If you ever hear him speak, he'd always go, "My boy."
That's funny.
How you doing, my boy?
In terms of like people, but I think the impersonations I hear the most in wrestling, obviously some of the names you named, but Dusty as well. Dusty gets impersonated as well a lot.
Oh, Dusty was. I think the thing with Dusty is though, like a lot of these guys, I think because WWE keeps their memories alive, that footage lives on forever. People like Barnett, they don't have a stake in Barnett legacy sort of thing. So it's like they've got footage of Barnett, but they don't need to promote that in some way. They don't need to promote someone else who was like, let's say, like Terry Funk, for example. He was always a impersonated wrestler as well. But it's always the same old guys: Savage, Hogan, Dusty. The Warrior. It's always guys like that you see nowadays. But so he had a rep for being really, really just a bastard, Jim Barnett. So they got him in, and he ran Angunkel out of business, and eventually he became part of the ownership of Georgia Championship Wrestling with the Briscoes, and he had a friend called Jim Oates, and Jim Oates he had the biggest stake in Georgia Championship Wrestling, and he wasn't really a wrestling person. Oates, he was just a guy who Barnett knew, and anytime Barnett had something going on in terms of an investment, he'd always ask Oates, and Oates would always invest, and he'd either make lots of money or he'd lose a bit of money dealing with Barnett. But so that's who Barnett was. He was a big time shaker in pro wrestling for years and years and years. Like I said, I won't go into the whole Black Friday episode, but either way, he was a big part of the WWF expansion in the early 1980s. Vince got him in after he left Georgia Championship Wrestling. And the thing with Barnett, NK, is that he is a really, really understated person in the WWF's expansion back then, because he had a rep for knowing everybody. And when I speak about politicians earlier, I spoke about politicians earlier on. Barnett knew people in television networks all over the country. In fact, in a lot of parts of the world, he knew people in television. And even if those people had moved on, he knew other people in the networks. He knew so many people. So he was such an important person for Vince McMahon to get into his company. So when Vince got him in, because Vince wanted TV all over he wanted TV all over the United States of America. Who better to get into your business to help you with that? Jim Barnett. So he called Barnett, and Barnett then had meetings all over the country with TV stations, and he got Vince TV in every single outlet in America, in all these American states, so he could go national. And I mean, Vince was actually paying for TV back then, see, wrestling promotions back then, they wouldn't pay for anything, and they wouldn't get paid. All they would do is send a tape in, and the TV network would air the show. You get massive ratings. You could sell adverts on that. But Vince came in and he offered TV stations money. So then these TV networks obviously are going to take Vince McMahon's tape and air it instead of airing, whoever's tape.
Was that to weed out the competition, or
that was just because he wanted visibility in all of these states, so he could run in those states. And for example, let's say he wanted television in Tennessee, he would go to that network in Tennessee and he would offer the TV network, let's say $3,000 a week to air his tape instead of the local promotions, the Fullers. Let's say the Fullers used to have the promotion in Tennessee. He would offer the TV network $3,000 a week and say, all right, you air our TV show. Don't air the Fullers TV show. You air our TV show. The network would then run WWF in Tennessee. The Fullers would have no TV station. So Vince could then run shows in Tennessee. And that's how it worked. He did that all over the country.
So is this kind of also how like, had the territory, so timeline-wise, had the territories already been bought up by this point, or not really? Were there still remnants left?
When Barnett went to work for Vince McMahon, Vince had just bought the WWF from his dad.
Okay.
He bought that in late '82. He bought the WWF, but it wasn't announced until much later than that. He was already running the promotion for a while before it was even known publicly that he owned the company. Okay. He bought it for $1 million, and it was going to be paid in 4 $250,000 installments, which it sounds like a lot and stuff, but the promotion was grossing $10 million a year, and he was running the promotion as soon as he grabbed his dad. So him giving his dad $250,000 a quarter is not, his dad basically gave him the promotion.
Talk about Vince having an eye for deals. You talk about that deal, the infamous WCW deal. I mean, Vince has saved a lot of money when it comes to like these major purchases.
Oh yeah. He's there's this myth going around that he bought it from his dad, and it's a great story because he tells that story. But when you understand the figures that he actually paid for it, with the amount that the company was grossing, and the fact that he was giving his dad $250,000 every quarter, it's not that much money when you consider how much they're grossing. His dad gave him the promotion in theory, but yeah. So the territories were still in business when Vince took over, and when Vince took over the WWF, I think what Dave was writing in the Observer at that time that Vince was going to take over the wrestling world, and he was already planning on taking over territories. And these promoters in all these territories would call Vince Senior, and they'd be like, "Look, Dave's writing this. People are saying this. What's going on?" And Vince Senior would always tell them, "Don't worry about it. My son he's not going to do that to you," because Vince Senior had a reputation of being quite honest, and they believed everything that Vince Senior said. And people always wondered if Vince Senior actually knew what his son was going to do, or if he was just lying to people. I don't know. Some people think he didn't know. Some people think he did know, and he was just covering for his kid. But either way, it was in '84 when it was in '83 when Vince started stealing talent from all these promotions, and in '84 when he really, really, really amped it up, and he got Hogan, and he got Piper, and he got Orndorff, and he got Jesse and Mean Gene Okerlund. He got all these people at the same time as well. And some of these guys didn't even work their notice. He paid some of these guys to just leave the territories they were working for. Don't work your notice, just leave. Like whatever dates you're advertised for, don't show up. We'll give you extra money. Just come straight to New York and work. And within a few years, he pretty much had a monopoly on. I don't want to say he had a monopoly. He pretty much had the entire United States of America. under his control. Crockett, NWA, Jim Crockett was still in business, and they were battling WWF. But if you understand wrestling at the time and you look at the two products, even though the NWA had a better wrestling product, it was nothing compared to what Vince McMahon had in terms of the look of his TV show. You know, Jim Crockett had, you know, he had the very dark looking arenas, even though the buildings were packed. Presentation wise, it was dimly lit, and then you had the bleach blonde guy with the blood in his hair and, and all that stuff, you know. And then you go to watch WWF, and you know, you got all these lights, and Hulk Hogan comes out in a yellow t-shirt, and you know, you got all these bright colors and characters. It was just night and day, really. But yeah, it wasn't long before the territories died at that point, and then Vince had a monopoly on pro wrestling. Eventually, when he bought WCW from Turner in 2001, and he had it till pretty much 2019 when AEW popped up. So, yeah. So as far as Barnett goes, Vince fired Barnett in like '86, and no particular reason. He was just done with Barnett. Barnett was of no use to him now. He got all the TV networks he wanted, so he fired Barnett. And Barnett went to work for WCW as an advisor. He was on the booking committee for a few years, and then he became an advisor. So he was just on payroll. Like Ted Turner had him on payroll. They never asked him much. They didn't call him to ask him for his advice on anything. But he stayed there until they went out of business. And that's obviously when he stopped getting money from WCW. But one more thing about Barnett, though, was that when WCW sold, Ted Turner had a non-compete. I think it was it's like a 3-year non-compete where he couldn't, if he wanted to, he couldn't start another promotion for like 3 years. And when that time was coming up, he called Jim Barnett, and he says, "Jim, I'm thinking about starting a wrestling promotion. You know, how much is this going to cost, and what would it take?" And Barnett basically said to him that for you to start a pro wrestling promotion, you're going to need millions and millions of dollars, and you're going to have to get guys from WWF, and you're going to have big time production, and you know, you've got to compete with what's already on television. And if you're not going to do that, there's no point doing it. Turner apparently looked at the cost that was all going to come up to, and he just decided not to do it, and that was that.
That's interesting.
If Barnett would have said something different, maybe Ted Turner would have started something.
Obviously, we have AEW right now. We kind of like know, like with the advent of TV deals and stuff like that, like AEW is not a cheap show to run in general.
Not all.
But at that period of time, obviously WWE was at the juggernaut at the time. But I feel like at least in pop culture, wrestling was in the much more prominent place in pop culture. So it's surprising that not they didn't go for it, but like nobody really tried to enter that wrestling market. I mean, you could argue like company like TNA did and so on and so forth, but it's interesting because I think in the 2000s, like at least from when I was growing up, but this might be nostalgia fueling me, but like wrestling was very much still a part of pop culture. So it is interesting that we didn't really see any like true challengers during that time period, or maybe just WWE had too much financial and cultural cachet at that point.
WWE was a big part of pop culture. Even then, in the early 2000s, their popularity really waned during that time. At the end of the Monday Night Wars, I mean, ECW in 2001, right at the beginning, ECW went out of business.
Yeah.
WCW went out of business a few, maybe within weeks. They all went out of business. And there was a reason why they went out of business, is because there was no need for those players on the market. WWE had eaten everything up. And other people tried over the next few years, but there was nothing out there for them. I don't really think there was a demand for pro wrestling. But also, WWE's popularity went down. You got to understand that when WCW went out of business, every Monday, there was still over 2 million people watching Monday Nitro. It was still one of the higher rated TV shows on the Turner networks. But when they went out of business, I remember when they went out of business, people were speculating what the Raw number was going to be the following week, because once Nitro went off the air, people are like, oh wow, WWF Raw is going to do a massive number the following week because all these WCW fans are going to tune in and they're going to start watching Raw. Okay, when that following number came in, it was like maybe went up 100,000 like people. Like the numbers pretty much on Raw after WCW went out of business pretty much were the same as they were previously. When WCW went off the air, there were 2 million wrestling fans that turned off their TVs. This never watched again. It was just like, look, they watched Ric Flair and Sting hug in the middle of the ring on that Nitro, and that was the end of their wrestling. They had no interest in watching WWF. That wasn't their wrestling. They didn't care about Triple H and The Undertaker and Kane and all these people. They liked Ric Flair and they liked Sting and they liked Lex Luger and they liked Tony Schiavone on commentary and stuff like that. And, you know, Flair shows up, Goldberg shows up, you know, you get a bit of a spite because you get people curious, but, you know, that wasn't the same Bill Goldberg in WCW. That wasn't the same guy, you know, it wasn't the same, and NWO showed up and you might get a bit of a spite, but it's not the same NWO, it's not the same presentation. So they just turned it off. And I think wrestling promotions for years and years and years tried to find those wrestling fans. TNA tried to do it.
Yeah.
Never found them. And even when AEW started, even after all that time, there was still speculation that maybe some of these old WCW fans would tune in. But they never really did. We just don't know where they went. They were just done.
Yeah. It's interesting to see the timeline of events because obviously you had the WWE basically becomes a monopoly after the purchase of WCW. But then I'm always interested in in just like the counterculture of like the independents. Whether like I was curious to ask you, like, obviously were the independents like a thing like that in like let's say the 90s and the 80s? Because obviously they're probably like smaller wrestling promotions, but like you really saw like at least from in my opinion, in the early 2000s, maybe you can talk about to the late 90s where people were like after the purchase were like really flocking to the independents like the ROH and so on and so forth. What was that scene like before the WCW purchase, if there was such a scene like that?
Well, you know, before Vince went national, obviously you had promotions all over America, didn't you? Because Can you move, please? Go away. Yeah, you had promotions all over America, so you could make a good living in a lot of places, you know. And the way wrestling worked is that you would go to a promotion for a bit, and then once your program was finished, you would then go elsewhere. You would work a promotion with Jerry Lawler, a program with Jerry Lawler. You do that for a few months, and then once that finished, you then went to the Carolinas or you went to Tennessee, or, you know, you just moved around. So when Vince took over those territories, there was still wrestling in those territories, but it became independent wrestling at that point because the crowds had dwindled, and, you know, you'd have, you know, a few hundred people at some of these shows, and the top stars that didn't go to WWF or didn't work for Crockett at the time were still in those areas, and they could, you know, still draw a few hundred people. And, you know, they'd book some type of name talent that was an independent guy, like Bruiser Brody or Terry Funk when he was on the market. Those guys would come in and they'd draw a house. But, yeah, that's pretty much when independent wrestling, as you know, today became independent wrestling, was probably, you know, at some point during the late 80s. And then in the 90s, you had different types of independent promotions pop up. You had the Philadelphia Tri-State Wrestling was run by Todd Gordon, and that was a predecessor of ECW. Todd Gordon was the guy that started ECW, but before he had Eastern Championship Wrestling, he had something called Tri-State Wrestling, which was very heavy action, barbed wire, you know, very heavily influenced on brawling, and a lot of the early ECW guys worked for that promotion. And once again, you just got whoever top independent talent that had just been fired from WWF or WCW, they book those guys, and that's how it started. But I mean, the independent wrestling that eventually became Ring of Honor, that started in the late 90s. When I say became Ring of Honor, the smaller guys who could work to a high level, those guys popped up in the late 90s. Before then, independent wrestling was carnivals and, you know, fairgrounds and, you know, old guys from the 1980s that were just trying to get booked. having really bad matches, and you get the honky tonk man to work your main event, and he wouldn't take any bumps, and or you'd get, I don't know, think of a guy, Greg Valentine, to work your main event against Jimmy Snooker, and they would literally do nothing. They'd just do their greatest hits. But yeah, it was years later when independent wrestling became this hotbed of talent, where you'd get smaller guys who were influenced by Dynamite Kid and Chris Benoit, and they've watched their New Japan tapes. That didn't come till later on.
Yeah, because it's interesting. It's good that you mentioned the New Japan tapes. I was always wondering, like, obviously that stuff was distributed through tapes and stuff like that. So, like, if this is more like a personal question to you. How did you personally acquire those tapes? Because I think right now, as a wrestling fan, like now for me, where I got into New Japan is through the internet. Like, it was easy, just everything was a couple clicks away. But but I can imagine somebody watching wrestling during like the 90s. It's hard enough to find your own like promotions with WCW and WWF because you're watching, things on television, on demand TV. Now you're watching New Japan and All Japan. Like, how was the process of acquiring that footage?
Well, we were quite fortunate when I was younger because you had quite a bit of wrestling on television. You had WWF on Sky, and then you had WCW on ITV, and you had UWFI was on Bravo, and New Japan was on Eurosport, and the Sport was on ITV, but that obviously finished. They stopped airing that, and quite early on, actually, come to think of it. But I mean, we had wrestling magazines back then. And you'd open these, not WWF magazine, but you had Inside Wrestling and Pro Wrestling Illustrated. And you'd have a look at all these pictures of all these different wrestlers, and you saw what promotions that they work for and stuff. And it kind of, that's what got me interested in trying to seek out wrestling. And then one day I got this British wrestling magazine called Power Slam, and in the ad section there was this advert for this guy called Glenn Radford, and he was a tape trader, and apparently in the ad it said that he had whatever tape you could think of, and I started buying tapes from him, and he was a really good guy. We actually became pretty much mates for the next 7 or 8 years, and he'd had everything. NK, this guy, I remember he knows that he had thousands of videotapes, like thousands. Whatever you wanted, this guy had it. It didn't matter if it was lucha, Japanese wrestling, whatever you wanted, he had it. And I was new to this, so I was always asking for recommendations. What would you recommend? So he'd always say, you should get the J Cup, or you should get, this Masawa Kabashi compilation tape. It's 8 hours, but it's got all their matches on it. And you're like, all their matches together? All right, great, I'll get that. And then you sit there and you watch these matches, and you're like, holy shit, this isn't what I'm used to. Watching Kevin Nash and Diesel and Mabel having matches on WWF television or whatever, or All Japan Women. I don't want to watch women's wrestling. No, you'd like this. This is really good. Like, you check this out. All right, fine, I'll check it out. And I had so many. I used to just buy tapes from this guy, and he introduced me to the Observer, Glenn Radford, because he was the person that explained to me the 5-star match. Because I remember him saying to me one time, "You should get this match because it's a 5-star match." I said, "What's 5-star match?" And he explained to me, there's this guy called Dave Meltzer. He's got this newsletter, and one of his things he does, he rates matches. And if a match has got 5 stars, you should really check it out. So I was like, oh, okay. And that's when I learned what a 5-star match was. It's not the same thing now, but back then there weren't that many of them. It was different back then. It was different.
I think back then the Observer, people who know about 5-star matches were Observer readers or people connected to the Observer. Like, there wasn't the internet where it's like there's this global discourse. Like, people who don't read the Observer can still know what a 5-star match is. You have to be really locked in to know what.
You had to be locked in. You had to be locked in. And also it's different now because you can watch anything you want nowadays.
Yeah.
That's what people say. People always say, in 1993, he only gave like 5 matches or 3 matches 5 stars or whatever. But in 2023, he gave like 20 something. And it's just like, it's different.
He's probably have access to more. Probably. Yeah.
there was, I'm sure there was probably 35-star matches in 1993 as well. We just couldn't see them because we just didn't have access to see them. Now you can watch whatever you want, whatever show you want. If you want to watch a Road 2 new one of these Road 2 shows, it's Road 2 Dominion or whatever you want to watch. You can even watch them if you've got 3 hours. I don't know why you want to. They're worthless pretty much, but
they used to be worth something though.
They used to be good, yes.
They used to be good. Like I remember like that Will Ospreay Tanahashi versus Kenny Omega and Ibushi happened on the Road 2.
What a match. That was a fantastic match.
That match is sensational. That happened on like a Road 2. Like it was a Road to Wrestle Kingdom, but it was still a Road 2.
Road to Wrestle Kingdom 2018 Wrestle Kingdom, right?
Yeah.
It was the one with
the main event was Omega, Tanahashi, and then Ibushi.
So that was Wrestle Kingdom 2019.
Yeah.
So that would have been right at the end of 2018, that tag match.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's just what it is. There's more footage out there for people to watch. So there's going to be more great matches that people can you can recommend to people and stuff. But I mean, what did you have? You had the Wrestling Channel or stuff.
We had the Wrestling Channel, so that's how I discovered. Big up Navy, big up Andy Nugent, big up Navy.
Hey, Navy was at Collision.
Oh yeah. Navy, tell us how Collision was. Tell us how I saw you post photos of that. Tell us how Collision was. But the way I discovered like non-WWE wrestling was the Wrestling Channel. I think I was flicking through. And the first ever wrestler I saw was Bryan Danielson, but it was when he was brief period where he was wearing a mask. The mask is terrible now, but back then I was like, I had obviously I liked Rey Mysterio, so I just liked anybody in a mask. I was like, who's this guy? And then I will never forget like hearing like them chanted Samoa Joe, Joe's gonna kill you, and I was like, what is this? And then I feel like through the Wrestling Channel, I got into two companies. A lot. I got into Ring of Honor and TNA, but also Jerry the King Lawler's Memphis and Pro Wrestling. I was watching a lot of Memphis, like a lot of Memphis. He never lose.
He did lose. Maybe the ones you saw, he did lose a lot.
Really? In the ones I saw, he barely lost.
I've seen Jerry Lawler lose. I've seen Jerry Lawler retire. I don't know how many times I've seen Jerry Lawler retire. I've seen Jerry Lawler lose. Loser leaves town. I've seen I've seen him lose his hair multiple times. Like he lost a lot.
Maybe I need to go back and watch those tapes. But like I remember watching like Jerry Lawler in Memphis a lot. Like that was fun.
He was great. He was Jerry Lawler. I tell you what, as a babyface, just that footage is so hard to get hold of that footage. But he was tremendous. Just like, don't get me wrong, he wasn't Ric Flair or he wasn't Ricky Steamboat, but he worked for his territory. He was a perfect Southern style babyface. He was a great heel as well. But he was such a fantastic wrestler, and he had the best punch I've ever seen in wrestling.
Yeah,
but fantastic punch.
Yeah, Navy says I got to see Ospreay, Danielson, Claudio, Edge, Pac, what a night. And he has a question: did the Golden Lovers ever have a bad tag match? I have to go back. I'm sure they have one, but I think they were on a run back then where they were just putting on class clinic after clinic. I think they had a match against Ishii and was it Ishii and Okada or someone? I think
right. Was that an American one? Was that an American show?
It might have been.
I think I remember it, and it wasn't that great. It was like it was fine, right? It was all right.
Yeah, it was fine, but it wasn't like anything like crazy. But yeah, I remember. Even speaking of America, I remember when New Japan did their G1 in America. Well, part of the G1 in America. They started off in America and then went back to Japan.
That was the one with Archer and Ospreay.
Yeah, and that's the one I think Tanahashi and Okada basically did like their greatest hits match.
Yeah,
in America, which was sensational. I've always said I sound like an attitude. I'm starting to sound like those attitude era guys where all they talk about is like the attitude era is the greatest era of wrestling. I always
Venus.
Yeah, I'm starting to sound like those guys when it comes to New Japan in terms of like, oh my god, but it's literally like it was the for me, it's just like the biggest like cultural shift in terms of like, oh my god, like what the hell? Like,
You ever go back and watch the older stuff?
So you don't. Yeah, I've gone back and what you sent me a couple Yuji Nagata matches that I've gone back and watched. I'm planning to do. Boom. This is okay. Interesting question. Since we're on this now, we had you made the distinction between like WWF and WCW. WWF had like the presentation for a long period of time. WCW, like for a period of time, was known as like the workhorse company.
Mm-hmm.
What was the distinction between like the Japanese companies in terms of All Japan and New Japan? That's something I'm fast because New Japan obviously during the 90s had Masahiro Chono.
Mm-hmm.
They had like Keiji Muto. They had a bunch of different stars. And obviously All Japan had, you know, the four pillars, had Misawa, Taue, Kobashi. What was the distinction between the two Japanese companies that set them apart?
Biggest one would probably be that, well, in ring, New Japan was more diverse, I'd say. You had the junior heavyweights, and well, I think in the early 90s, there was this fluctuation of these fantastic junior heavyweights who'd been all around the world learning their craft, and they took all these different styles. I mean, nowadays, there's a lot of I don't want to say a lot of wrestlers, but a lot of wrestlers watch these tapes and they pick up what they saw these guys do. But guys like Ultimo Dragon and Liger and Benoit and Eddie and those guys, they literally went around the world learning these different styles, and they came back. And New Japan just had they had a fantastic junior division, and the matches were just, don't get me wrong, I think you could go back and still enjoy them, but at that time they were, you know, Jushin Liger against Ultimo Dragon, or Liger against Sasuke, or Benoit against Liger. Those matches at that time were pretty groundbreaking in terms of this, what the evolution of pro wrestling was. But you had that style, and then you had your main event style, which is quite stiff, strong style, but you also had different martial arts styles that were implemented into the promotion as well, because Inoki was still there, and Inoki still wrestled martial arts guys in real fights. Well, they said they were real fights, but I mean, hence the name King of Sport, because you had other different fighting styles coming into New Japan. Also, you had disqualifications and countouts in New Japan. In All Japan, you didn't have that. You always got finishes in All Japan. And obviously, you had the King's Road style, which is completely different to what New Japan were doing. You had a really heavy hitting suplex, dropping people on their heads kind of style. And you didn't get that in New Japan. New Japan, you could say, was more diverse, and maybe you had a bit more finesse in New Japan. But All Japan was just, it was brutal, it was stiff, it was passionate. It was, I don't want to say, you could say it was a more sports presentation, because there was no run-ins, there was no outside interference. It was, everything was just played straight down the middle. And it was, it's something that AEW, people always say that they need to differentiate themselves from WWE. And I wish they would as well, because they do sometimes, because you always get finishes their matches. But, you know, you don't need contract signings in AEW. You don't need heel GMs, and you don't need, you know, the stuff like that. You really need to just decide exactly what you are and just be the opposite of what they do. And that's what those two promotions did at that time. But then you also had other promotions around Japan that had their own niche. You had Michinoku Pro, which was a Jap Lucha promotion. And Jap Lucha is a term that people don't use anymore. But back then, Jap Lucha was a fusion of Lucha Libre and Japanese strong style. And guys like Sasuke was a very prominent practitioner of that style. And Dragon was too. They were probably the two most famous people that did that style. But Michinoku Pro was a promotion based around that style of pro wrestling. And then you had FMW, which was super popular as well with Inoki. And that was, what was FMW? It was very bloody, lots of barbed wire and explosions. And they used to draw really big as well. The wrestling in FMW wasn't up to the standards of other places, but the spectacle was you could argue, was far greater than the other promotions. Because once you get Inoki in one of these these baseball stadium main events with 50,000 people there, and that exploding barbed wire and that ring just blows up. Anyone who saw those at the time, you'll never forget those.
Yeah. Navy in the comment.
Right.
Sorry, I cut you off.
No, it's so important. Go ahead.
All right. Navy in the conversation says, big up Navy. Navy's been doing some amazing wrestling edits as well. A lot of like Noah stuff. But looking back at All Japan Pro Wrestling / Noah for my edits, in my opinion, that's pro wrestling at its best alongside the recent peak era in New Japan.
Oh yeah. That was your favorite period of wrestling was that New Japan.
Yeah. I think that's my favorite period of wrestling. I've dug into like Noah stuff as well, and like probably like some later Noah stuff when it comes to like Kenta Marufuji, and then obviously the latter years of like Kobashi. But I really need to. I've watched like a few of like the All Japan tag team main events, but I really need to like delve into like, a lot of the singles matches. I've watched bare the tag matches though.
You should speak to me.
Yeah, no. Atlas has been that guy is dedicated, man. Like
he's the expert.
Yeah,
he's the expert.
Yeah, he's been going through. But yeah, I'd say my favorite period in wrestling is that New Japan 2010s period. It's because I think for me it was just like it was such a departure from anything I was watching, even in TNA, because TNA was like the first time I found a company within the X division that like really prioritized like the wrestling aspect. But discovering New Japan was like probably the first was like discovering like bread for the first time. It's like, where have you been all my life? It's like, what the hell is this? It's like just the presentation was so different, but the pageantry was there. Like there was a level of that pageantry, and then like I said, the term that's been butchered right now, long-time storytelling, was there. Like I witnessed like I watched Naito and Okada feud. I watched the Tanahashi and Okada feud from like the beginning, and that's why like not to go on a rant, but when people were like, oh my god, the product is so hard to get to, it's like, no, it's not. Like I went into Wrestle Kingdom 10 with like very little context.
Which one was Wrestle Kingdom 10?
Wrestle Kingdom 10 was the one that had AJ Nakamura, Tanahashi, Okada, and then Shibata and Ishii. That's like probably one of the best 3-match stretches I've seen in that was a fantastic show.
Fantastic show.
And I went into that main event. Obviously, the commentary was like hit and miss. Like the back then, New Japan's English commentary was hit and miss. I think they had Matt Striker on the show, which his commentaries, I don't think he's as bad as people say he is, but he's not great either.
Striker's terrible. Have you seen him work for AAA? He's awful.
Now, yeah.
Even back then, that New Japan show, I thought he sucked on those New Japan shows that he did. I remember he did one with Jim Ross, and I think Jim Ross was making an effort, and Matt Striker felt like he was thought he was working WWE. Some of the stuff.
He was trying a lot. Like I remember, like he compared like Tanahashi and Okada's rivalry to Arsenal and Tottenham, and I was like, that is not no.
I don't know what that means, but it sounds.
No. Tottenham haven't won a trophy in 30 years, so like no. Yeah, it's a bad comparison. It's basically comparing like a main eventer to like a mid carder. Like it's ridiculous. But yeah, but even then, even with the like bad commentary, like I still managed to like piece things together and like, oh, okay. And then that's what it was just like. It was the first time like there used to be this YouTuber called I'm not gonna shout him out because he's kind of weird now, but there was this YouTuber who used to like really like WWE content, but used to have like an agenda against John Cena for some reason. Okay. And then one of his members in his like chat was like, hey, Okada's wrestling AJ Styles. Like, who the hell is this Okada guy? So I just Googled, and then I definitely just think that period in time in terms of wrestling and then just Japanese wrestling as a whole, I fell in love with it. Like I went back and watched like a lot of like Noah stuff, and I'm always obviously you've explained that in the past that Noah was obviously formed from the mass exodus from All Japan Pro Wrestling, and that happened because of Giant Barber's wife, correct?
Yeah, Barber died, and Yeah, she wasn't. Makoto Barber was. She took over the promotion, and she wasn't a popular person in the company amongst the wrestlers. They really didn't like her. Very harsh woman, and people say like she would. People now, I've seen people say that Barber was the good cop and she was the bad cop, but really Barber was really the kind of guy that was like, everyone likes me, so you deliver this information to them, and I'll be the baby face and I'll marry sort of thing. And she was fine with doing that, but after he died and she took over, a lot of these guys didn't want to work for her. A lot of people, and she was. I've always had she was quite intimidating, Mrs. Barber. She was quite scary, and yes, Navy. She really liked Ace. She loved Johnny because he was tall and he was blonde and he was handsome, and yeah, she had this thing for Johnny Ace. She would always get her husband to push Ace into main events, even though Ace wasn't any good. She would always put him in those 6-man. Johnny Ace has got like more 5-star matches than you'd even imagine. This for being in those trios main events, those All Japan matches. He always played his part in those. But yeah, so once he died and the anniversary, his tribute show at the Tokyo Dome finished, they fucked off and they formed Noah. And All Japan, they struggled, man. We thought that All Japan, the fact that they're still around now says a lot.
It's a testament.
I mean, yeah, at that time, I mean, God, they had to get in. Everyone left. They had to get in Bart Gunn, and they had Dr. Death Steve Williams come back, and he was at this point his marketability was shot. He got knocked out in WWE. You know, it just wasn't good for them. They had Tenryu come back for a bit as well. Yeah, but I mean, how did we get onto this? I don't remember.
No, I just asked. Basically, I just asked. Like, I was gonna ask as well. Obviously, the death of Misawa, I think that was that kind of the turning point for Noah, because it was like Noah came into prominence because, like I said, All Japan's popularity.
They'd been struggling for a while. They'd been struggling. They were struggling for a while. Misawa. I know Misawa was just working because when he could still draw to some degree. I mean, he wasn't drawing big at all, but his name in the main event meant a lot more than anyone else's. So he just kept working. Unfortunately, when he passed away, they went through a lot of. I mean, Japanese wrestling during the early 2000s. I mean, it wasn't good, man. I mean, those New Japan. I mean, you could argue that I was surprised that they're still in business now. That's how bad their business got, because Inoki, I mean, Pride was really popular. Yeah. And K1 was really popular, and Inoki had his hands in those groups, and he would put pro wrestlers on those shows in real fights, and he would put the MMA fighters in pro wrestling matches, and he would have them work fake fights, and he'd have the pro wrestlers work real fights, and you just don't. I understand, because that's what got him big. That's what got Antonio Inoki to the legendary status that he had for the rest of his life, was that he booked himself in fights against real fighters. However, he had fake fights against real fighters. I mean, he had the one with Ali, which was a real fight, although it was supposed to be fake, but it was a real fight in the end. But all the other fights that he had against martial artists, they were fake, even though people in his country believed they were real, they were fake. So him deciding that he was going to book, Fujita in a real fight, or, Sakuraba in real fights or whatever, it's just really, really ill-fated. And you can't put in even Yuji Nagata in real fights, and you're putting these guys in real fights. Okay, it's fine, but you're putting them in there with real fighters,
killers,
like Mirko Krokop. Should not be fighting pro wrestlers. You know what I'm saying? Like, or he should not. Vegeta should not be fighting Mirko Krokop, or he should not be fighting Nogueira and all these big guys. Vanderlei Silva should not be fighting pro wrestlers. I guess it's kind of like now with if Randy Orton had a fight with John Jones, it's ridiculous.
I mean, we saw it with Phil.
Yeah, well, yeah, and he did. Look who he fought. He fought Mike Jackson, who I think was 1-0. Mike Jackson, or was he 0-1? I don't remember.
Yeah. To put into context, like he fought CM Punk fought Mickey Gall, Matt Jackson, who are no longer active UFC roster fighters. I think they got released within like a couple years of those fights.
Yeah, they weren't. Yeah,
they weren't good.
Yeah, and Punk fought them. He wasn't fighting. What was he? A middleweight? Was he a welterweight? I don't remember.
I can have
probably a middle. Don't worry, he's probably a middleweight. Looking at Punk's build, but I mean, could you imagine if he fought? It was a middleweight. Anderson Silva was a middleweight at that time.
Yeah, Anderson Silva. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, just Chael Sonnen or whoever, they would have destroyed him at that time. Yeah. But that's what Inoki did, and Fujita got beat. Nagata got beat. You killed your business. You're killing your pro wrestling.
Was pretty good though.
Who?
Sakuraba.
Oh, that's different. Sakuraba beat the Gracies. He beat 3 Gracies. He was the first guy to ever beat a Gracie in a real fight.
There was a video. I'll send it to you. I think it was about MMA on Point. There was like greatest.
They're really good. They create really good content over there.
It was like greatest pro wrestlers / MMA fighters, and I think Sakuraba was number 1.
Yeah, he was. Oh, definitely.
They had him as number 1,
without a doubt. Problem was though is that they booked him way too. They didn't give these guys chances to break. They just had him fight all the time. And he fought real fighters, and he should have been protected more because he beat the Gracies, and then they put him in there with Anderson Silva, and not Anderson Silva, sorry, Vanderlei Silva, and that was just they shouldn't have never done that to him. He was never going to beat Vanderlei Silva, but so I mean, Japanese wrestling was on its arse for years and years and years, and the fact that New Japan came back on the back of Tanahashi and Okada, and it's incredible that they ever came back because I thought they'd be out of business by 2010. I stopped watching wrestling around that period. I stopped watching wrestling completely, just focused on Pride and K1 and the UFC. It was actually the New Japan. It was Okada and Tanahashi and those guys that got me back into pro wrestling.
Really? How so? Because you were out of pro wrestling, so like, what gave you even the impetus to go check that out?
I still read the Observer every week. I still read the Observer, and I still was up to date with what was going on in wrestling. I just didn't want to watch it until I kept seeing these great reviews for these shows, and Dave was raving about Tanahashi and Okada, or he was raving about Goto and all these guys. So I was like, let me step in and check this out. And I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. I just thought they were doing matches that I'd never seen that quality of wrestling before. And then they were bringing those guys over to London. I mean, I went to so many shows during the Rev Pro peak. I went to pretty much all those shows, and we got to see Nakamura, and we got to see Tanahashi and Okada and Shibata. I don't even know how many times I saw these guys wrestle. I saw them wrestle all the time. And Suzuki was here. I felt like he was here every month, Minoru Suzuki. And we saw all those guys. And it really reinvigorated my passion for wrestling. And then All In happened. And I don't think I ever liked pro wrestling ever in my life as much as I liked it during that period. It was just such a great time to be a wrestling fan. Yeah. That whole independent surge.
Yeah, Navy in the comments says the Noah Junior division was going crazy. I don't know if they drew well though.
Noah during like 2004 to 2006, they were like the most popular wrestling promotion in Japan.
Like, they had shows in the Tokyo Dome as well.
Yeah, they did. They didn't sell out. They still did decent houses in the Tokyo Dome. But they did pretty well at times in Noah. It was the other two promotions that were on their arse. It was All Japan and New Japan that were on their arse, really. But Noah did well throughout times in the mid 2000s.
The Japanese scene is very interesting because obviously you've had different promotions like be on top at different times, and obviously it's interesting now because I think all these promotions are still around in varying degrees. And which is different from the US where WWE bought their main competitor WCW, where in Japan it's like New Japan's probably the most historic company, right? In terms of like the most historic company, but there's been peaks and troughs where Noah was a dominant promotion. Did All Japan ever reach like similar levels of popularity to New Japan?
No,
Or-
but they did really well.
Okay, so
They
it
were
was
very
always
healthy alternative, very healthy, and you could argue at times that New Japan always had Tokyo Dome shows, and they always did, and they also had Inoki. You know, once you've got someone like Inoki on your car, you're just a different level. Like All Japan did really well for years and years and years. They'd sell out after sellout. You know, you're drawing 16,500 people, you know, to these shows.
Yeah.
You're doing tremendously well as an alternative. And like once again, a completely different product to what the opposition is doing. And they had their own fan base, and people would argue what was better, but I guess it was just up to preference at that point.
Yeah. Is New Japan still the number one promotion in Japan, or did anyone overtake them?
They're still the number one promotion in Japan.
They're still the number one
by a decent margin. By a decent margin. Even in their weakened state, they're still number one. I don't see anyone.
I think Japanese promotions as a whole aren't doing well. That's why this whole All Together show stuff is happening. Yeah, like they need.
WW. The last time a WCW were the number one promotion in North America, you could argue even the whole world actually, for a year and a half in 96 to like the beginning of 98. But it didn't last long, just flash in the pan. It was their fault that they self-destructed. It was their own fault. It was nothing at WWF. WWF obviously presented a decent product, but it was them that did that to themselves, really. All that bullshit they were doing. I don't see a time when WWE will never not be the number one promotion.
No, they have too much. They have way too much cultural cachet. They've got they're too big to fail at this point. They're the Apple of pro wrestling. Like they're not going anywhere.
No, they're not going in. Even when AEW first started, Tony Khan never ever said he was going to be number one. He wanted to create an alternative. You can't beat WWE. The head start is too big. And I think we've learned over the last few years that a lot of people, they're always going to watch WWE anyway, even if another product is actually better than the one that WWE presenting. We've learned that people will still watch WWE anyway. I'm not saying that's the case now, because to me, no, neither of those shows are something I need to be watching right now anyway. But I think people just have their preferred promotion. It doesn't matter what they present. I think people are just going to watch it as it is.
Yeah. I think the WWE is just it's an institute. It's like it's what the Hoover is to vacuum cleaners. Like we call vacuum cleaners Hoovers, but Hoover is a particular brand. It's not that for a lot of people, WWE is like, people won't ask me, do you watch wrestling? It's like, do you watch WWE?
Yeah, they think that's the name of the sport. Is
that's
WWE.
the name of the sport, is WWE. So it's just a ubiquitous entity, and it's like you can't escape it.
No.
Yeah.
And they're obviously really popular. They're on a high right now. I don't know how long it's going to last, but wrestling goes in cycles.
It does.
They're really hot now. These things don't last forever. Then they've just got to try and get back to. They just got to try and get hot again. that's just how it is.
Yeah, but I think their core fan base is big enough to where it's like, I think right now in pop culture though, WWE is an all-time high. Not all-time high, but there's highs they've been at in the last 10 years.
Yeah. I think Austin and Rock and those guys, I think in the late 90s, I think they were. Yeah. I think you had to be, for people who weren't there, I think you really had to be there to understand how famous Steve Austin and The Rock and those guys actually were. They were, or even in the 80s with Hogan. I don't think I've ever seen a wrestler as popular, as famous as Hulk Hogan in my time. In our part of the world, in the Western world, Hulk Hogan was definitely the biggest star I've ever come across in wrestling. You ask older people to name one wrestler, they'll mention Hulk Hogan. That's how it is.
That's who my mum always goes to, Hulk Hogan. Like
Hulk Hogan is the go-to person. They'll watch his movies. He was just a super famous guy. even to this day, he's still a famous guy because he still looks the same. He doesn't look the same, but he still retained the look that he had from back then. I mean, he's done that so he can remain recognizable.
Recognizable, yeah.
Yeah, obviously. But yeah, I mean, I was saying about All In was my peak of pro wrestling fandom, I think. And obviously AEW started at that point, and I watched AEW, but those New Japan years when Okada and Tanahashi were main event, and then you had Ibushi and Naito and Shibata and Ishii. There was a main event, just a main event murderer's row, really, you know. And Omega.
I took that stuff for granted because it was like the quality of wrestling you were getting on a regular basis. I mean, you can say that with AEW now. AEW is like probably like the best like Western wrestling promotion I've seen in terms of match quality.
But never been anything like it.
But with New Japan, I guess because the shows were more spread out in terms of pay-per-views, like every month and a half, I'd get like a 5-star classic and I'm like, what the hell? And I just like it was the process of like discovering a new person, like who's this, like, and there are so many matches that like obviously people talk about the Omegas, the Okadas, the Tanahashis, but then you'd have guys like Hiroki Goto just having a random classic,
Michael
Elgin having a random classic, like, you know what I'm saying? And it's like it was a time period where it was like what the hell? Like, this is insane. And then the explosion, I think witnessing the popularity of Bullet Club in real time, people won't get how popular they were. Like, they were ridiculously popular. As a wrestling faction that weren't on an American promotion, they were astronomical. Like, I remember even seeing regular people in Bullet Club tees. Wouldn't know what it's about, probably didn't know where it came from, but fine if you're wearing one right now. But
I am actually.
Just seeing regular people in Bullet. I think Bullet Club as a Westerner was like the entry point, but just seeing how like popular they got, there'll never be a time like it. And I remember even explaining on like early episodes of wrestling, like, yo, Bullet Club is the truth, man. Like, Bullet Club is the truth.
I tell you what, when they used to come over here, those are memories, bro. For like when the Bullet Club would come over here and they'd come out, and the reactions that those guys would get when they came out, it's unbelievable the amount of heat that they would get. I mean, I remember. I mean, God, it could be any set of them. It could be Hangman and the Bucks. It could be Kenny and the Bucks. It could be Marty Scurll and the Bucks. Whoever came out, bro, like, it was just insane. Like, the reactions they would get. I remember there was a time they had a match in York Hall, and you had Cody, Hangman, the Bucks, and Marty Scurll, all five of them in the main event. And I've never been to a wrestling show where my ears rang after I left. My ears were ringing for ages after I left. The amount of heat that they had, like, and it was so much fun back then. And I went to All In, and I mean, obviously, All In was louder because the amount of people, but my ears didn't ring.
Do you know what we should do for next episode? I was thinking, since you mentioned Pride, do you want to do like a pro wrestling MMA episode? Because I feel like it sounds like the pipeline.
I've got one on Wrestling for Idiots.
Oh yeah, you do.
I did. I went through. I even went through the Stardust trio in the early 1900s.
I remember that one. Yeah, I remember watching
that. You can talk about it if you want. I can always talk about Pride.
Yeah. Because I feel like even the relationship between like just pro wrestling and MMA is so interesting. In fact, the influence that pro wrestling has had on combat sports in general, I think, is like a really interesting thing, because I think the way, like, Dana White has said multiple times, like, how he books, like, how he markets stuff. Like, for example, Conor McGregor's rise to fame, he's a WWE character. Like, he's like the way like fights are promoted, like, it's very like similar to the way pro wrestling promotes. I've always found the relationship between combat sports, especially like MMA today, and like pro wrestling WWF fascinating. So yeah, I think maybe that could be like a topic that branches off into something else, because obviously we spoke about that on Wrestling for Idiots, isn't it?
Yeah, we can do that. I can always talk about Pride and K1 and all that, because Bob Sapp, I love
Pride's presentation is something I do want to see replicated in MMA though. I feel that level of pageantry that Pride had is just unmatched.
Oh yeah, we never. It's crazy because it's so long ago, and to this day I've never seen anyone even touch it in terms of the video packages and the presentation. And even I loved when everyone would come out at the beginning of the show, and the ring announcer would announce every single fighter that was going to be coming on, and they'd all stand on the stage. I always loved that, and I always thought if a pro wrestling promotion did that at the beginning of the show, and everyone came out and you introduced their names, like you introduced everyone, and they lit up like a spotlight came on one person. You're like Kenny Omega, and I just thought that would be a fantastic because they did that every single Pride show, and it was so good. Like it was just an excellent time.
Pride had murky waters because some of the fights are legit and some of the fights were complete bullshit.
There were fake fights in Pride, yeah. There were fake fights in Pride. But what they would do with Pride was they would to get around work fights, they'd get their top guys and they'd get them training for ages, and they'd advertise them on the shows, but they wouldn't advertise opponents. And then like about 3 or 4 days before the fight, they would then get some guy, whoever, and they'd be like, we need someone to fight Wanderlei Silva on Saturday. You up for it? So then this guy would come in and Silva would be all, he's been training for ages. And then you've got this guy who's totally scared. He's been training. I don't want to say he's been training, but he's got 3 or 4 days notice to get into shape, and they'd put him in the event with Wanderlei Silva. And as you would imagine, they got destroyed. And or they put him in there with Quentin Jackson or some other beast of a man or whatever, just to get destroyed, super quickly. And that's what they did in Pride to get those records up. That's exactly what they would do, just give wins to people. But yeah, Pride was a time, and if anyone hasn't seen it, it's all the Pride fights. They're all available on our UFC Fight Pass. The full complete shows with the same. Antonio Inoki did a skydive once on a Pride show. Shockwave. He jumped out of an airplane. It was.
I remember seeing that. I do remember seeing that. Yeah.
It was Sakuraba against Krokop in the main event. Jerome Labana knocked out Don Fry, another pro wrestler. And who else? Bob Sapp was on that show, pro wrestler. Fujita was on that show. Sakuraba was on that show. I just named 4 pro wrestlers that were on that one Pride show.
There was one really tall, like Japanese guy on Pride, like really tall. He used to lose a lot.
Hongman Choi.
Probably
Hongman Choi. He lost to Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar's first fight with Hongman Choi. Yeah.
I'll answer Navy's question, and then after that, I think we can get out of here.
Yeah, sure.
Navy says Cody wouldn't be where he is without Bullet Club.
No chance.
No
chance. I don't want to start on that, but
yeah,
he didn't lead the Bullet Club. Sorry,
he didn't. Fry Takayama is probably my favorite fight of all time.
Yeah, classic fight. That's an incredible fight. It was. You doing that?
No, I haven't seen that one. No.
Yoshiro Takayama and Don Fry. Yeah, absolutely incredible.
I remember watching. I think it was Crow Cup Silver.
Yeah, that was a great fight. Though.
Yeah, the stare down alone, like it was like just Crow Cup looking into Wanderlei Silva. Wanderlei Silva was a very frightening man, but just Crow Cup's like stillness and calmness. Oof.
And those guys were juiced to the fucking gills as well. They weren't drug tested. They weren't drug tested. So it was just like they didn't give a shit. They didn't give a fuck at all. Just put them in there and fight. Like them man there, they were fighting injured. No drug testing, bro. Just get in there and just whatever happens. And I remember Don Fry got into a fight with James Thompson, and this is when Fry was totally finished. And I remember he stood in that corner, and James Thompson was just teeing off on this guy's face, this pounding, this punching away at Don Fry's face, and Fry had no defense. And because it was Don Fry, and because he was a star, the ref just let it happen. Because they didn't want Don to lose. And he's not going to go down, is he? Don Fry's not going to get knocked out, so he's just standing there taking punches. And James Thompson was throwing haymakers at Don Fry, and it was just, and the ref never did stop it. He didn't stop it. He went back to his corner, and I think the ref, his cornerman just wouldn't let him go out for the next round. I tell you what, Shamrock and Don Fry. If you ever get a chance to see that, Ken Shamrock and Don Fry. That was February 2001. No, February 2000. Absolutely incredible, NK. I mean, the build was fantastic, but I mean everything from the end, the video package, the entrances, and the fight itself. Because Don broke his ankle in the first round, and his cornerman taped his ankle up. It's such pro wrestling theatric shit when you watch it, and the way they film it, and the way the commentators, like Moro's on the call, and the way he's calling it. But they tape Fry's ankle up, and he goes out there and he wrestles. He works 2 more rounds with a broken ankle, and he's
what legit broken ankle?
With a legit broken ankle. Shamrock broke his ankle in an ankle lock. He'd shoot, put an ankle lock on, and then broke his ankle. And Fry limped to his corner. His corner taped it up, and he went back out of there and he fought for 2 more rounds and he won.
Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely incredible fight. Those are the fights that you just remember. Remember those moments, bro. Like,
yeah.
So these boxing moments you could think of. That's up there for me. That one.
One of these days, I'm gonna have a conversation with you about Fedor Emelianenko, but that's a different conversation for a different day.
My favorite heavyweight of all time.
Yeah. But yeah, man, this has been a Commissioner's Corner. Like we said, it was a slow news week, so we decided to have a chit chat about all different things. Hope you guys enjoyed that.
Navy, is Navy still in the chat? Are you going to All In, Navy? Is Navy going to All In?
Yes, Navy. Let us know in the chat if you are going to All In. But yeah, as you are doing that, make sure you like, share, comment, and subscribe. Make sure you watch the other content we have on Wrestlings, whether that's the flagship podcast, whether that's the whether that's Indie Takers. Yeah, make sure you tap into the various pieces of content we have. Navy says, I want to. Try make it, but it'll be lovely to meet you. But obviously, I know you're in Europe somewhere. So
he's in Germany, I think. I think maybe he's in Germany. I didn't see anyone at All In last year. I didn't see anyone. You guys were all on the other side of the building, it seems, because when I saw you guys on Instagram and stuff, you were all on one side and I was on the other side.
Yeah.
I haven't even bought a ticket for All In yet. I will.
I haven't bought one yet either.
I keep telling my son.
Navy's in Italy.
Italy. Okay, yeah, cool.
Yeah.
I keep telling my kid I'm going to buy tickets. I look at the tickets and I just haven't done it. I don't even know why I haven't done it. I just should really just get on it and buy them. But
I should. But you know what it is? I mean, I'm gonna go anyways. But I'm just gonna go like when I see a card, or some resemblance of a card.
I think we're getting Okada and Omega, which in a stadium will be awesome.
Sensational.
Yeah, and then I guess Swerve and Ospreay in the main event, with Ospreay winning the title.
Oh, this would have been good to discuss, but quickly. So Okada's got. I mean, Omega's said he's opting for surgery, but he seems to be pretty active in the product right now. So has he had this surgery yet or no?
No, he hasn't had it yet. But apparently, I don't know if this is true, but I've read apparently if he has surgery, he should be back for All In. I don't know. That's what I'm saying. I don't know. We'll see. It's weird. It looked like he's building up a match with Ospreay on social media the other day, but he looked like he was a heel, and I don't even think he should bother because he's a babyface on TV. I don't know why he'd want to do that.
Yeah,
right now it just didn't make sense to me what he was doing. But I'll buy it. I probably might even end up buying him today just to keep my son quiet. He's only watching right now anyway. He's not bothered about it.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. I know.
But yeah, guys, tune in next week for another edition of Commissioner's Corner. Like always, make sure you are active in the comment section, letting us know what topics you'd want to talk about. But it's been NK, it's been Knowledge. We are signing out. Catch you guys next week. Peace.